What is up, everybody? Mr. Prentice here. Welcome to 7.7. Sounds like a lucky number. We're doing a little fighting in World War II, 1900, 2001. But again, that's the time period. But really what we're looking at is 1939 through 1945. So approximately a 6-year period that World War II is going to last. Starts on September 1st, 1939. And ends in August of 1945, for those of you who really care about this stuff. So we got into the causes of World War II in the last one. Let's get into the fighting in World War II. Here's the deal. There's a ton of good movies and good documentaries and World War II and color stuff all out there on the internet. My goal is not to go through all the battles and all the fighting. The AP College Board doesn't care about that stuff. That's not the focus of this course. So this video is just on what you need to know. I'm going to go through and start here with a couple major events just so you're aware of them, but then I'm really going to get into kind of just what you need to know for the AP exam, because that's the purpose of these videos, right? So here's the deal. A couple major events in World War II that I just want you to be aware of. I got some dates up here. These dates will never be asked for. You don't have to memorize them. I just want to let you know kind of how things progress. In 1939, the Nazis invade Poland, and like we talked about in the last video, it is split with the Soviet Union. They have a non-aggression pact with each other where they agreed to split Poland in half. Poland is a new country. It just was created after World War, essentially after the country as Poland as it's known after World War I, and that was with land that was given from the Russians to the Germans in the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk, which got the Russians out of the war early. If you remember that, good for you. This is going to start World War II. Britain and France are going to declare war on Germany and say, we can't stand for this. Now, they don't also declare war on the Soviet Union. It's just on Nazi Germany. In 1941, 2 years later, Germany violates this non-aggression pact and they invade the Soviet Union. And the problem that they run into and why the Nazis, kind of their biggest blunder, what's eventually going to begin the downfall over the course of the next couple of years, is they are going to invade the Soviet Union, but they leave too late in the spring and they're going to end up getting stuck in the winter in Russia. And you never want to, no country can ever beat Russia in the wintertime, except for the exception to every rule, which is the Mongols, but they get stuck in the winter just outside the capital. They're right here. So this is Moscow, the capital. They're right on the cusp here, 10 miles outside the capital, and winter hits and they can't bring their tanks through and their soldiers start dying and they get stuck. In 1941, in December, there's the attack on Pearl Harbor. The U.S. had been gets involved, declares war on Japan as a result, and that brings the U.S. into this war on the side of the British and the French, and also the Soviet Union. So the allies in this war are going to be the U.S. Here's represented by FDR. We got Britain, represented by Churchill and Stalin, which is kind of ironic because the U.S. after this war are going to hate communism, and they hate communism during this war. But even though Stalin is a communist and a totalitarian, even though that's the case, they are going to support him because they have a common enemy in Hitler. So we got this side versus this side. So there's two fronts to this war. Again, there's tons of stuff out there. It's not the focus here, but there's two fronts. There's the war in Europe. All right. And this is what the red parts are, the German-controlled areas. Switzerland is always neutral. That's why they're kind of here. And war in the Pacific, which is mainly going to be fought on islands in the Pacific, islands that the Japanese had expanded to during this period. So there's two fronts. But here's what we need to know. Here's kind of the important stuff. This is the bread and butter or the meat and potatoes or whatever other kind of food reference you want to make, is we have a total war. This is the same as World War I. We have a total war, meaning all hands on deck, whether you're a soldier, whether you're on the home front at home. Everyone's expected to participate and be involved in winning this war. The first thing I want to talk about, exact same thing as World War I, is the colonial people are told, if you help fight with us in this war, we will give you your independence when it's done. And again, a lot of colonial people step up, volunteer, help fight against essentially Nazism, which was a discriminatory process, fighting on behalf of their mother country, which has been discriminating against them for the past 60, 70, 80 years. So we have Indian soldiers here stepping up. We have French African soldiers, the Vietnamese, Vietnam, which is a French colony, is going to send soldiers. Also, again, I want to point out that African Americans are very much discriminated against in the United States at this point. I wouldn't call them colonial people, but definitely an oppressed group. And they are going to volunteer. These are the Tuskegee Airmen who flew bravely in World War II. So after World War II is over, you can imagine what these people are going to say and what's going to happen, which is going to be part of Unit 8. Also, we have factories that are going to produce military goods, so we're getting away from our consumer goods from the in-between the wars period, especially in the United States, and we're going to shift towards more of a production of military products, tanks, planes, whatnot. Women are also going to re-enter the workforce. Just like what we saw in World War I, when the World War ends, men are going to come back and take over these jobs, and women are expected to be back home again, for the most part. And this is obviously Rosie the Riveter. This is the cartoon version of Rosie the Riveter. This, by the way, is the real Rosie the Riveter. This is the Norman Rockwell picture that actually starts it. A rivet is something that you put into huge metal pieces. Takes a lot of strength. It shows how strong you are. And this is the original Rosie the Riveter. She's eating a sandwich. Her foot's on Hitler's book, Mein Kampf. And then this is kind of the glamorized version, I guess, that comes out later of Rosie the Riveter. So also we're going to reduce food consumption. Same exact thing as World War I. We're going to have rationing. You can only buy a certain amount. We're going to have eat less bread, what you need for victory. Also, we're going to have propaganda and ultra-nationalism again. So we have propaganda posters. Usually in World War II especially, we see a lot of racist propaganda. So we have, this is a U.S. propaganda. If you worked as hard and as fast as a Jap, we'd smash Tokyo a lot quicker. Drawn in kind of an animalistic view there. We have a positive propaganda. This is Hitler. Kids, are you with the leader? Are you with the Fuhrer, essentially? And Hitler holding a child. For some reason, when politicians hold babies, everyone thinks they're sweet and sensitive. You have a German cartoon here knocking Hitler over. This is Winston Churchill, supposedly, in this grave here. So, and then you have another American one, the Nazis and the Japanese looking over. So, a lot of propaganda, a lot of ultra-nationalism. One other thing we see in this, we didn't really see this in World War I, we see it a lot more in World War II, is we're going to see a lot of repression of freedoms during the war. In the United States, you might have learned about this, that the U.S. government took Japanese Americans, these are American citizens, and they took them out of their homes on the West Coast and put them into internment camps. They put them into basically camps in the middle of the deserts and out in the Southwest, and really kind of something that totally is a violation of Enlightenment ideas and Enlightenment principles. They're going to violate, and we see this repression in order to mobilize resources to make people feel safe, secure. We definitely see it much more so in the totalitarian governments, where they're going to crack down on any dissent in World War II. Nazi Germany had a ministry of propaganda. They literally had a department of their government that was just devoted to propaganda stuff. They're going to go around and make sure nothing criticizes the government. The Lügenpresse, if you remember that from the other video. Also, Jewish authors are going to be books are going to be burned, and this is done throughout the 30s and into World War II. Stalin is going to personally oversee the film industry, so everything that people are told about the war is going to be positive from the perspective of the Soviet Union, or Nazi propaganda film is going to show positives and how great the war is. We're going to see the same thing in the United States. The war is great. Our soldiers are having a great time. They're fighting discrimination around the world, and they're fighting the evil threats, that kind of stuff. So we're going to see this control by these governments to let their populations know what's going on, and what they're going to let them know is what they want their populations to hear, because they don't want people to turn against this war effort. Because if people aren't in support, and we're trying to mobilize all people through food consumption and through propaganda and ultranationalism, it's not going to be successful. We're also going to see, similar to World War I, we're going to see a bunch of new technologies. These new technologies are going to lead to an increased casualty rate. One thing the Allies do in Germany and Japan is they're going to firebomb cities. Unlike in World War I, where all the fighting is done between soldiers, in World War II, countries are going to specifically target civilians. They're going to intentionally try and bomb cities, to intentionally kill civilians, to intentionally change the support for the war in those countries. Between 44 and 45, the Allies, specifically the United States, along with the British, are going to bomb and kill over 400,000 civilians, non-soldiers, in Germany, and about 250,000 people in Japan. So they're just going to try and drop as many bombs on these cities as possible, not caring who they're going to kill. And again, the difference between World War I and World War II is now we have planes that can drop bombs, when in World War I, those planes were really just looking at, they were just surveillance. Also, obviously the atomic bomb, which we'll talk more about in class, in August of 1945 to end the war against Japan. The U.S. is kind of presented with this idea, or the president at the time, Harry Truman, you can either invade with ground forces and lose up to 500,000 American soldiers, or you can drop this bomb that we just invented, that we haven't even tested. And he decides to drop the bomb. So they drop one on Hiroshima, and the Japanese don't surrender. So the U.S. 5 days later drops another bomb, or 3 days later, drop another bomb on Nagasaki, which leads to another 40,000 deaths. That's the initial death total. More are going to die later from radiation and famine and disease and a whole bunch of other stuff. And we'll talk more about this in class, but I do want to just point out these new weapons are going to lead to increased technology. There's going to be a whole bunch of questions when this is done. So Germany surrenders, Hitler kills himself, the Nazis surrender, and that's in May of 1945. And in August of 1945, the Japanese surrender, which is the end of the war. There's a whole bunch of issues and questions of what to do after this war is over. First of all, we have a ton of casualties. This war, the death total in this war is outrageously high compared to past wars. I mean, I think every other major war ever in human history does not equal the amount of people who die in World War II. That's just how, if you can grasp that concept. So a couple questions we're going to have to address moving forward in the post-World War II is, what do you do with losing countries? What do you do with Germany and Japan? Do we punish them again? Do we take away their military? How do we make sure that we don't stop this war? And how do we make sure all these people who have been raised to be Nazi totalitarians, how do we create a new country where they don't want to persecute Jewish people and they're more an open society? Also, how do we avoid war in the future because the League of Nations was a bust? What do we do with the colonies and independence? And then what do we do with the Jewish people who survived this issue, who survived this Holocaust, which we will talk about the Holocaust in the next video. And these are kind of the burning questions that they need to decide. How can we use World War I as a blueprint and example of what not to do so we make sure we avoid World War III? And if you look at these numbers here, just in terms of how many people are going to die in each country, 25 million people die in the Soviet Union in World War II. That is an insane number. We can't even grasp it. And for about 14% of the population, 6 million in Poland, most of those people are going to die. A lot of those people are going to die in the Holocaust. Most Holocaust victims were from Poland. And then you come down here, 7 million in Germany, 15 million in China, 1.8 in Japan, 400,000 in the United States. And this is just the percentage of their population. So what do we do? How do we rebuild? How do we make sure this doesn't happen again? That's going to be the burning questions that we're going to get to in units 8 especially, and a little bit in 9. But that's what I got. You got any questions? You know what to do. Write it down. Let me know.